This is the Your Kick-Ass Life podcast, episode 39, with guest Amy Smith. All information and resources that you hear here in this podcast can be found by going to yourkickasslife.com/39.
This is the Your Kick-Ass Life podcast with Andrea Owen, a no BS guide to self-help and badassery. Because ladies, let's face it, life's too short for it to not kick ass. And here's your host, the girl who serves it up straight with a side of crazy, Andrea Owen.
Hey ass kickers, Andrea Owen here, and welcome to the show. I am so honored to have you here. Really, y'all, I mean it so much. And today I've decided to forego the traditional reading of the bio, like it's the Running with the Bulls or something. But this is my best friend, Amy. And I just kind of feel like if I just read her bio, that's really boring because I know her so deeply and intimately. I can tell you more about her really by just telling you from my heart. And this is really off the cuff, you guys. I have not rehearsed this. I just hit record. So Amy is someone that I met years and years ago and is one of those people that you meet. And she really, truly is one of those people who I believe just came out of the womb evolved, came out of the womb just already born to have an open mind and an open heart. And really that's what drew me to her in the first place. And I'm so grateful to call her not just a colleague, but my very best friend, because she is really someone who looks at the world with an open heart and an open mind and an open spirit and is so incredibly wise beyond her years. I am so lucky to call her my best friend because I can come to her, and not only does she help me through things when I ask her to, and is so incredibly smart, but really is one of those people who will see you and hear your story and truly see you and hold space for you. And I know that sounds really coachy, and that's okay, because truly that's what she does. I don't really know how else to describe it. She just has a spirit about her that is like no one I've ever met before. And what I always say about her, you know, when someone asks me about her and they've never met her, I always say she makes me a better woman just by being around her. One of the most genuine, authentic, and smart people that you'll ever meet, Amy Elizabeth Smith. So here she is on episode 39 of the Your Kick-Ass Life podcast. Hey there, ass kickers. Welcome to episode 39. And I have a very special guest, probably one that none of you know. If you've followed my podcast at any length of time or followed me at all, you know that the Joy Junkie is Miss Amy E. Smith. So, hey, Amy.
Hello. Hi.
Very excited, as usual, to have you. And we've often talked about having our own show, and I think someday we will. I don't know how we're going to fit it all in with our very busy, fancy lives.
I know, right? Yeah, no, there's definitely, although I do think it might be nice if it was like a comedy hour.
Right. So as you know, ass kickers, or maybe you don't know, so I should probably start from the beginning. I recently this summer went to a training to get some new coaching skills. And the training was put on by Dr. Brené Brown, her senior faculty, and is based on the 14 years of research that she has done around vulnerability, authenticity, courage, and shame. And that's really where the focus of Your Kick-Ass Life is going. And it is really something that I have talked about a lot in so many words, but now I have kind of different words to wrap around it and to really hone in on this issue in order for everybody to have a better life, because that's what we're all here for. So, and the reason, mainly what Dr. Brené Brown's message is that we're all here on this earth for connection. And really the birthplace of that is vulnerability. And the birthplace of everything, like all of the positive emotions in our life. She actually says all emotions, the hard ones and the easier ones, dark ones and light ones, whatever you want to call them. Really vulnerability is the birthplace of all of them. And so that's really what I wanted to talk to about with Amy today, and more specifically about vulnerability in our partnerships and in our relationships. Because what I see in some of my clients that come to me for one-on-one work and in groups, it can be an issue. And one person is more vulnerable than the other, or somebody wants to sort of, have more vulnerability in their life, but they aren't sure how to instigate it, or they might be like going about it in not the right way. So that's why we're here. We're going to talk about vulnerability and relationships. All right. So first question.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Born ready.
Well, the first question I have, and I think this is one of the really common ones, is what do you do when your partner has trouble opening up and being vulnerable? Where should someone start?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny. I knew what we were going to kind of chat about today, and I ran it by my husband, and we do a podcast together. And so he's kind of
shameless promotion.
He's inadvertently become a life coach because he just listens to all this stuff all the time. So I was kind of running it by him, and we were talking about vulnerability and intimacy and what that really looks like and means in a relationship and what do you do. And I was kind of researching some of the definitions and stuff. And I thought this was really fascinating. So vulnerability, if you actually look up the definition of it has a real negative connotation, because it talks about being vulnerable is opening yourself up to hurt, or being susceptible to injury, being susceptible to hurt, right? And so that really, I think, is what we're always trying to avoid, right? So what do? We build up all these walls, and we don't allow the closeness. We don't allow intimacy. Yet it's the same thing that we crave. So I've always felt in my world that vulnerability has a direct correlation to the amount of intimacy that you experience. So if you are not willing to be vulnerable, then guess what? You're not going to experience the depth of intimacy that you're capable of as a human. So truly, I've always said, like, the reason why my husband and I are so incredibly intimate with one another is the same reason why either one of us could destroy the other one in an instant, because we're in that deep. There's no walls, and we are susceptible to hurt. But the flip side of that is that we are able to sink into an intimacy that most people never see, never touch. But it's a risk. So there's a piece of understanding that there's a trade-off there. Now, so that's just kind of like a precursor about this whole concept and
topic. I want to stop you for a second, and I hold your thought, because I think that you're absolutely right on about what you said about vulnerability, and that's what Brene talks about. That's her definition of it as well, is that, she's not out there saying like, oh, vulnerability is like the birthplace of everything and it's super easy and everyone should do it. Like, no, you're right. It's emotional. I think she describes it as emotional risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure.
Yeah.
And I think that that's absolutely it. Like and what she also said, it's a direct correlation. Your ability to be vulnerable is also directly correlated to she calls it like the greatest measure of courage.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Right. Because like, it's so easy for us to walk around with a mask, to walk around with walls up
and fake it.
And it's right. You're true in understanding that you are safe. You are totally safe, but you're also unable to experience the vast depth of intimacy and soulful connection that we're capable of as humans. That's what, so it's an acknowledgement. So if you find yourself craving depth and intimacy, get ready to exercise some courage. Get ready to be uncomfortable, because they are directly related. And I'm not as familiar with her work at all, but that's one thing that I've always said is like, dude, if you want it to be intimate and super connected and close and soulful, then you need to knock some of your walls down. You need to exercise risk, period.
It's scary.
It is scary
because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And I think that that's what people struggle with a lot. I think, and I don't want to blanket this, but like, especially women is we love control and a guaranteed outcome. I think just a lot of people do. It's just one of the defense mechanisms that we put up, and there is none in intimacy or love. You know, we could put our heart out there and be vulnerable with someone, and we could get rejected. We could get, they don't take down their walls. Like, we have no idea what's going to happen. And you're right. Like, you can fake it. And I think that's what most people walk around doing. But that is the definition of disconnection. And that is heartbreaking. And there's, in my opinion, there's way, way greater risk in life than to go through life disconnected and never have taken the chance to be vulnerable and experience that than to actually try.
Yeah, you know what? And something that I absolutely agree with you on that. And I would love to share somewhat of an anecdote with a friendship of mine where, like, I was vulnerable and then I got hurt and all this stuff. But I think, for me, with what you just said, regardless if I'm hurt or not, or regardless if somebody like destroys me, if I've invested in a friendship or a relationship, that's the woman I want to be. Mm-hmm. I want to be a woman who feels deeply. I want somebody, like, even when I lost my father, I was like, God, this is the depth of human emotion right here. Like, this is what it feels like to be in sorrow, in grief. I want that. I want to be able to feel deeply and richly. So yes, there's an absolute risk anytime you're vulnerable, whether it's an intimate partnership or a friendship, family members, whatever. But that's the woman I want to be. Mm-hmm. I want to feel that, whatever it is. So for me, it's like that reward, that gain of feeling that the depth of my humanity, that's reward enough, regardless how I'm received. And I don't know how many people actually view it that way. Because we think avoid hurt, mm-hmm. avoid pain, mm-hmm. avoid pain. But if you've ever read, The Power of Now, with Eckhart Tolle, it's all about like, what can we feel in our pain? Like, what's here for us? What power can we experience when we actually sink into emotions that we're feeling, even if they're negative? And my God, that's powerful because you feel so human and like, you're not running. Right. You're not running away from feeling your humanity. So, I mean, that's a little disconnected from our topic, but, I wanted to just share something kind of as personal story that I had. And then I definitely want to get back to what do you do if your partner isn't vulnerable or willing? But I had a situation, and I think this kind of underscores what I'm talking about as being the human you want to be and allowing yourself to feel what you want to feel. And so I have this close friend of mine, and we do a lot of theater work together. I do some of that in my spare time. And, he was sharing with a group of us, like, just a really beautiful sentiment about acting. And, it was very emotionally charged, and it was just really, really beautiful. Right. Mm-hmm. So I sent him a text and I just said, I just love the man that you are. I love the human you are. Thank you for sharing your heart. Something I was really open, vulnerable, whatever. He responds with a smiley face. And I was like, no, that is not how you respond to me being vulnerable.
I do not accept that smiley face emoticon.
I was like, ignore. No. So I was like, that is not acceptable. And so my first response was, I think, one that many of us do. Okay, I was vulnerable and I was not met with vulnerability. Therefore, I'm hurt and I'm going to shut down. And that was my first instinct, was like, I'm done with you. I'm done trying to be an open vessel of what's going on in my heart, how I feel about you, blah, blah, blah. And this is really the chronology of what I went through in like 24-hour span. Mm-hmm. So at first I get like really upset, like done. I'm never going to do that. Never going to be open with you again. Angry, mad, which is a totally natural response to being rejected, or something we equate as rejection, whether or not it really was or not. And so I thought about it, and then I was like, you know what? I will not allow somebody like this in my life who isn't able to handle vulnerability or it's challenging for them, I will not allow them to change the beauty of the vulnerable person that I am already, because I want to be her. I still want to be that woman who says exactly what she thinks, who isn't afraid of talking about rich and deep things, who isn't afraid to tell people what they mean to me. Like, I want to always be that. And so then I got to this point where I was like, no, I'm not going to put up walls just because I didn't get the response I want, because that's not the woman I want to be. So then we ended up having a conversation, and I just like told him point blank, I'm like, you pissed me off with that. And that in a note was vulnerable. And I shared with him exactly what I just told you guys right now, that I'm not willing to be shut down emotionally and halt intimacy or halt vulnerability because I was, or my perception of how I was received was poor at one point, Mm-hmm. So I think that that's also a statement to personal power, because you decide what this is going to mean in your life. And I kind of went, okay, I'm not going to allow that to change who I am, period. And I don't think that that's the natural response. I think our natural fight or flight type of primitive response is to go, oh my God, that equated hurt. That was equated embarrassment, abort mission. Don't do that again.
Right.
Instead of going, you know what? I'm really like how I showed up. I'm going to continue to do that. It's a totally different perspective.
Totally different perspective. And I think that you're right on and what I see, a little bit of a different topic, but what I see frequently in some of the clients that come to me is that they get to be in their 30s typically, and a lot of their friendships have sort of withered out because of situations like that, because they wanted a deeper connection with their girlfriends and they opened up and were vulnerable and it wasn't reciprocated. Right. Or, they were really there and, held the space for somebody one of their friends when they went through something and then it wasn't reciprocated. So they shut down, and then they don't let anybody in because they make the assumption that that's just how it's going to be. And I think that happens in intimate relationships as well. I mean, that's what people are talking about when they say like you've built up walls. That's totally exactly what that is. So tell us what should someone do if, and I think that your example was a really good example of what happens in intimate relationships. So
Well, so here's something, just a note on what you just said, because I could have easily shut down in that situation and gone like a fucking smiley face, and that became really real to me and a truth about he doesn't care about me as much, or this friendship isn't as rich as I think it is, blah, 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 right? You create a truth, sever the relationship, it becomes a gap, mm-hmm. right? Instead, I just fucking laid it out on the line and told him everything about how I felt about it. And the reality, what he said to me was, that was one of the most heartfelt, amazing texts I've ever received. And sometimes I don't know how to articulate how exactly I feel about you.
Which I think is a typical response for men.
Right. But my God, what a different truth that was than what mm-hmm. I made up. But the point that I wanted to drive home about this is there was a conversation. And I really, in my body of work and everything that I've learned, I don't know if there's really any way to cultivate intimacy and vulnerability without conversing candidly. Yeah. Like, I don't know if there's an alternative method besides plain old conversation. So I really think that there's, it really depends on where you're at in your particular relationship. But I would say take a baby step towards vulnerability. So like, let's say you're in a relationship where, you're the partner who's done some work. You're really interested in creating, a little bit more of a vulnerable relationship, and you have a relationship where, it's very routine, and your partner comes home from work and you're like, how was your day? Oh, it was fine. And then you eat, maybe you eat in silence and you talk only about surface stuff, and you're just not really in any depth. I don't think the natural conversation is to be like, tell me about your childhood fears. Mm-hmm. I don't think
that's the hardest thing you've ever been through.
Right. Tell me what is, what you're terrified of, your depth your fears. I don't think that's the place to start. And so one of the things that I wanted to underscore is, I was looking at these different words, like I was saying, I looked up the word intimacy, right? And really the only definition of that is closeness. And even when we talk about intimate apparel, it's something that is closer to our body. It's the level underneath. Right? It's not your surface clothing, your outerwear. It's your intimate apparel, right? It's closer to your heart.
Your skin. Uh-huh.
Right. Yeah. It's closer to your skin. So I kind of thought, oh, what a great metaphor for the closeness in our relationships. So how could you get a little closer, a little bit under the surface level? And sometimes it's just about plain old getting to know one another. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things that I love to do that are very harmless. One of them is relatively new that I've started doing with my husband. And we just started looking up, would you rather questions online. Mm-hmm. And it's really funny and it's kind of surface and it's very conversational, but it starts to allow us to get to know one another, because when we're saying okay, would you rather wear a clown clothing for the rest of your life, or would you rather wear clown makeup every day for the rest of your life? And then we start dissecting, well, okay, then you could do this. And well, gosh, it's such a pain in the ass to do that and blah, blah, blah. And so you start getting to know how each other thinks and what your thought process is and what your rationale is like. And it's a getting to know one another. So that's one of our favorite things to do.
I love
also,
that.
You can do, there's tons of questions on the internet where you can look up getting to know you questionnaires and well, what is your thoughts on global warming, or what are your thoughts on leftovers, or,
I know you have thoughts about those.
I do. I do. I have issues with leftovers. Who are your closest childhood friends?
Didn't you say that you've been married with Mr. Smith forever, and he knew that you had an issue about leftovers, but didn't you say recently, or am I making this up, that he didn't know why? And so one of your things was he asked you what is your deal with that? And it was new to him?
Yeah. Cause I kind of went, I often don't want to ever eat the leftovers, but I think because I grew up with so much scarcity, it hurts my heart to throw away something like food.
Even though you know very well when you're packing it up that you're not going to eat it.
Yes.
You like the
so
idea
I'd much rather I'd rather save it and then let it spoil, and then I can throw it away because it's spoiled.
Yeah.
It's the stupidest rationale, but it's one of those little Amyisms.
Yeah.
And those are a getting to know you. That's a beneath the surface.
Well, and I think that if Mr. Smith, if you guys didn't already have the level of intimacy that you have, it would have been a great conversation for you to talk more about your childhood and growing up with scarcity and what that was like for you. And that's a vulnerable conversation.
It is. And I think a lot of times we equate vulnerability and intimacy to being radical. We have to talk about our deepest pains, and we have to talk about our deepest fears. And it doesn't always have to be the case. What if that just equated really knowing, truly knowing somebody? Let's get to know each other further. So you can do things like that. Also, the book of questions is a great one where it's just conversation starters. Because even if you've been in a long-term relationship where you haven't necessarily exercised a lot of vulnerability, you get into ruts where you come home, you both are quiet through dinner. Have you ever seen that when you witness a couple who's quite a bit older and they're sitting having food together and they're not saying a word? They just don't
converse.
That's
intriguing to me.
They don't converse. I think, that's fascinating to me. So it takes a little effort. But we do that all the time where we just bust out book of questions, or we do some would you rathers. And it's about cultivating a knowing, knowing each other. And that's totally intimate and totally vulnerable to say, well, gosh, even as we were doing these would you rathers, I'm I'm too vain I'm too vain. Like, it bothers me to have somebody pick out my clothing, you know, because we did one, like, would you rather have somebody cook for you for the rest of your life? Like, decide what you're going to eat, because I'm kind of controlling about my food. Or would you rather they pick out your clothes for the rest of your life? And I was like, oh my God, at least if they picked out fattening foods for me and I gained a bunch of weight, I would at least know how to dress my figure, you know, and I could still express myself creatively. So again, I'm just sharing. It's like, it's a superficial sort of like joking, would you rather conversation that leads to really getting to know one another. Mm-hmm. So, and I also think, you know, when we were talking about earlier, just plain old having conversation, letting them know candidly, I really love you and I really crave you and I want more of you. And I would love for us to continue to date, to court one another, to get to know each other even further. I don't think you need to say like, I need you to really be more vulnerable with me. You know, like sometimes I think we make it way bigger than we need it to be, you know?
And I really love that. And I think that's really worth repeating, that your whole point about that it doesn't need to be like this big grand step of asking someone about their childhood, or if maybe your partner had a parent that treated them poorly or passed away, you know, you don't need to dig. That's pretty scary, and vulnerability in and of itself is scary for people. But I think that you can really ease into it. I mean, it's so funny. I've been trying to do that more and more with Jason and just asking questions. And we recently had a conversation about candy. And
cool.
Because we recently discovered our mutual love for gummy bears. And it was something that like we had never known about each other before. Like if somebody asked me like, what are Jason's top 5 candies? I would not have put gummy bears on there. So it was just like kind of by accident we found this out. And then we started having this conversation, and like he knows that I'm not a fan of Snickers. And so he was like, what is it about Snickers that you don't like?
Yeah.
But you just never know where that could lead. It could lead into something bigger. And I think that even if it is just a conversation about candy, it opens up conversations that are not about your work, that are not about your children, that are not about just like these really everyday things. Yeah, that you talk about all the time, where we have these like robotic answers. So I think that's really helpful. Thank you for that.
Well, I wanted to make a mention about this too, because this is so funny that you brought up candy, because Mr. Smith and I have had conversations about that too, which turns out he was shamed a lot as a child for spending any money that he always worked really hard, you know, in like paper routes and stuff. And he was shamed if he spent it on candy. So as an adult, he still has a very strong sweet tooth, but he always feels the need to hide any sweets. So if he gets candy, he'll eat it in the car. And, you know, he's working on not carrying shame around sugar and things like that. But had we never gotten in a conversation about candy and stuff like that, we would have never gotten to this. Oh, so there's some interesting stuff about your childhood around that. So that's an exact example of how something really superficial can lead to something very vulnerable. And the point is, you guys, like if really the genesis of intimacy is just a knowing, just get to know each other.
Yeah.
It can be, you know, really, really simple, right? And I just wanted to say one other comment that we did years ago for one of our anniversaries. He wrote up 100 things I don't know about you, 100 questions. And you can source these types of things on the internet. And what we did is we kept this like packet of paper in my purse. And every time we went to dinner, we always, you know, very ritualistically had a date night once a week. We still do. And we would take them to dinner and we would do like a question or two over dinner. And it was getting to know each other. It was depth. It was intimate. It was vulnerable. It was sharing. But it wasn't under this place of like, tell me your fears. You know, like it was fun and playful and enjoyable. And vulnerability and intimacy were like a byproduct instead of like the focus.
Right. Yes. I like that. I totally like that. And that's going to be a tweetable, by the way. And It's funny. Next time I see Mr. Smith, I'm going to be sure to give him a big pack of gummy bears. But I think that's a really great segue into the other point that I wanted to spend some time discussing is I think that intimacy, the word gets thrown around a lot when it comes to relationships and, things that we need to have with our partner. And I think that a lot of people, me for one, for a long time, didn't even really know what that meant. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions, that it has to do with sex. And and I knew that wasn't the case, but there was for a long time where I just was like, I don't even know what that truly looks like. And that's why I think it's a perfect question for you, because you've had so much experience in that in your own marriage and talk about it. So give us your thoughts. The floor is yours.
Just on intimacy and relationships in general?
Yeah, just what it is and what it looks like, whether you have pointed to some really good examples of what it is, but if you had to, if an alien came from another country and you had to explain what it is, what is it?
Yeah. You know what? I think, what's interesting is sexual intercourse is actually one of the definitions of intimacy. But if you look at it, it's 7 definitions down. It's not the primary definition. And really, the primary definition is closeness. I mean, that's really what it is. It's connection to somebody on a close level. So that can be interpreted in any number of ways. But I really, really loved, of course, 8th or 9th definition was intimate clothing, intimate apparel. And I really, I mentioned that earlier for a very distinct reason. I think it is a great metaphor for us to look at, is this something that's on the surface or is this close to my heart? And is it something that actually has depth or meaning? I think you can be intimate with a stranger.
Yeah.
Because it's about, is this something that's close to who I am? Is this a definition of who I am? Is this an extension of who I am? Or is this really, really the surface level? And that's really it. So I think it's about closeness and knowing with somebody, anybody. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the realm of sexuality. I definitely think there's an intimacy in closeness and knowing somebody sexually, for sure. But I think also, even for you and I, Andrea, I feel like we have a very intimate relationship in the sense that I know you and am very close to you in ways where I know what's on your heart. I know what you're passionate about. I know what scares you. I know what excites you. It's a knowing. That's it. It's not just, I know what sexually gets you off. I don't know you intimately that way. you know?
But I think what you're pointing to and what keeps coming up for me when you're saying all of that is that it's about connecting heart to heart with someone. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a conversation.
Right. No. Yeah, absolutely. It can be spiritual. It can be a look. It can be, connecting that way. How many people are so uncomfortable looking at each other in the eyes? Even that is a step of intimacy with somebody. You are looking at, how you can look at somebody and you can really look at them and feel them and connect, or you can just look at them and you're kind of glazed over. That's not intimate. That's a difference there between something surface or something close to the heart.
Yeah. I also think it's connecting at a heart level, and it's really opening yourself up. And I think that that's really the hardest part for people. And I think a question that comes up often is it's sort of what came first, the chicken or the egg? Who goes first? I hear that sometimes, it's I want somebody to be intimate and vulnerable with me, but I really want them to go first because I'm too afraid of it not being reciprocated.
Right. So my advice in that would be say exactly that to your spouse.
Yeah, I like
Say exactly that. I am craving intimacy and I am terrified of making the first move. Collaborate.
That's vulnerable. Just saying that.
Right. How infrequently do we really look at relationship as collaboration? It's not you or I, it's us. So how do we make us work? And sometimes you just have to give voice to what's going on for you. And I think, what do? We spend so much time in fear paralysis and we never do anything about it. Like, what if you actually had that conversation and said, God, I crave you. I want to know you. I want to know everything about you. And I know that the thought of you knowing everything about me terrifies the shit out of me. So it's got to terrify you. What do you want? Like, let's talk about, like, can we actually just have a conversation about it?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it reminds me of when we were in coach training, one of the leaders, Amy and I went to the same coaching school, the Coaches Training Institute, Jeff Jacobson, who's brilliant. One of my favorite things that he said was, you know, if you're in a coaching conversation, which is intimacy, and coaching someone is an intimate relationship. And if you don't know what to say and you're feeling really vulnerable, say what's there. Just absolutely say. And it's actually one of the principles that they taught us as coaches. Yeah. It's like, you know, maybe when like your client says something to you and you're stumped, or maybe like shit came up in your own life, like in your mind that's going on, you know, for you, then you just say it. Like, I got really distracted right there because, you know, and it's like, wow, what if we just lived our lives like that? Like, how different the world would be if we just said what's there.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, it's something that I've said over and over again, that most of our problems would be completely solved if we just spoke our truth out loud. Like, most of our relationship problems would be solved. But what do? We talk to our coach about it. We talk to our therapist. We talk to our best friend. And meanwhile, our spouse has no idea what's upsetting us. Yeah. Like, really? Like, no. So, I mean, if you want an answer that doesn't involve talking, this is not for you. Like, I don't know that. I don't know any other way to cultivate connection without speaking to one another, you know, long term. I mean, definitely there's connection you can do with like eye contact and, you know,
lyrical dance, knitting,
sex
side by
and
side,
stuff like that. Like, there's definitely stuff that's nonverbal.
Right.
But I also have a huge problem with people trying, I call it doing things to get things, where they think that solely by their action, they're communicating their needs. And it's just a fallacy. You know, like, okay, if, like, for instance, if my husband leaves his shoes out all the time and I enough times grab them and throw them into a closet, one day he's going to, of course, notice how much I want him to put his shoes away. It's like, no, we're not mind readers. It's the same situation with this friend of mine who thought, oh my gosh, all I have right now to give this girl is a smiley face.
Yeah.
And then when we actually had a conversation about it, he opened up and was like, I don't know how to express that to you sometimes, how much I care about you. Yeah. And then it was like, oh, well, look what happens when we fucking talk about it.
Right. Oh, such good wisdom and nuggets from you, Joy Junkie.
Oh, thanks.
I love it.
This is a hard one. You know?
It is. And I think that this is why I'm 39 episodes in and I've had you on my podcast 3 times and I haven't brought it up yet. But and that's why I'm excited, you know, to talk about this more, just more and more and more, because I really do think it's the key to connection with people, and connection with people is the key to happiness. So, thank you so much for this. I love every minute of this. I love learning new things from you, even though we talk every day. And so tell people because I know that you have more on relationships and how people can create better relationships in their lives. I mean, this was just a tiny snippet of what you have to offer. So where should people go?
Oh my gosh. Well, right now, at the time that this is airing and everything like that, I would love for everybody to cruise by. I have a free video series happening right now. And if you just go to thekickassrelationship.com, you can get all 3 videos, and we cover stuff like this, like what's like the brass tacks on communication, sex and intimacy. I cover what I believe is the #1 secret to a happy, long-term, fulfilling relationship. And it's all totally free. And there's challenges, and you can take the challenge each day and try to implement in your relationship. And it's designed to be very short, very easy things that you can implement to actually make a marked difference in your relationship, like today. So
I love that they're like short. I mean, seriously, you guys, everybody has 15 minutes. You can get off of Facebook and Instagram for 15 minutes today.
Well, and I always think, like, what blows me away is that if I were to ask anybody, like, what's the most important things to you in your life? Most of us would say my marriage, my children, my family, my spirituality, right? And then you go, well, how much time do you actually how much time and energy do you put into this thing, this relationship that you swear means something to you? And it's like, oh, actually, I always put that on the back burner. Like, what would change if you actually tended to this like it mattered?
Yeah.
You know? So,
yeah. So if it's thekickassrelationship.com, right?
Yep. All one word. No
The
underscores.
link will be in the show notes here, you guys. And of course, if you need any links to the resources, if you go to yourkickasslife.com/39, if you are driving, or if you have my website bookmarked, yourkickasslife.com/39 and thekickassrelationship.com. So thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, I'm so happy
Come back anytime.
Okay, cool.
Okay, I'll come back tomorrow.
Done.
All right, Ass Kickers, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time and space with us. I'm so grateful and honored to share the journey with you and help you create your kick-ass life. So until next time, I will see you out in the interwebs. Bye-bye.